not. I mean, a lot of people in the MMA world know your history as a kickboxer. A lot of people from the outside know you as the coach, right? I mean, I even saw a picture back in the day of your kickboxing, holding the belts, wearing a belt, and holding it. You look like the boss at the end of Bloodsport. Like, you had the look on point. From that kickboxing career, where did you go from there to deciding I'm going to switch to MMA? Because I heard that you did it by accident, right?
Yeah, I got involved in MMA more by accident. Well, I was a real estate agent by trade, and
At the same time as kickboxing.
no, I gave up the real estate trade to pursue the kickboxing because you can't really be successful if you're going to do real estate and kickboxing. I had to give it up. So I gave up the real estate. I became poor, which I was poor as a real estate agent anyway, so didn't make any difference. But I had to do something part-time, and I was coaching a few students, and I was like privates, lessons while I trained in kickboxing. And as a result of that, one of my instructors was Scott Coker, who's the president of Bellator. Okay. Now. Back then, he was just my instructor. And he started throwing fights that called Strike Force. No, before that, it was not Strike Force. It was ESPN or something. I forgot the name of it. But he had thrown events on television way back then. So I used to help him with all the kickboxers, et cetera, et cetera. And I got involved through him in the fight game. So I became a fighter through Scott Coker. After fighting for him and winning 2 world titles, light cruiserweight, and then 1992, and then 95 won light heavyweight. I retired, and during that time I was fighting, I had a bunch of students, and one of them was named Brian Johnston. And Brian Johnston was my first introduction to the UFC. At that particular time, I knew nothing about the UFC, but Brian Johnston wanted to be involved. So he asked me if I knew anybody in the UFC, and I said, well, I know Art Davie, because Art Davies was the matchmaker that originally started the UFC, and matchmaking for the UFC. He didn't start the UFC, he was matchmakers.
Yeah. That's a big difference.
Yeah, big difference.
Yeah.
So Art Davies was the matchmaker. I called him up. I said, hey, I have a heavyweight that would I'd like to enter into your competition. He does judo with Mike Swain, and he, who's the first American that ever won a world judo championship and from the U.S. And Art Davies says, okay. And I said how big he was. I sent a picture. And back then, if you looked at the UFC, everybody was huge, right? The bigger you were, the better you were for them, the image, right? So they took Brian Johnston in. And as a result of Brian Johnston, I met Frank Shamrock. Okay. And it was because of Brian that I got introduced to Frank. As a result of that, Frank became the first champion that I trained. The first UFC middleweight champion. Frank Shamrock was with me. And as a result of Frank Shamrock, I got involved with BJ Penn. And BJ Penn came to me before BJ Penn fought in the Mundials, the world, right? Yep. BJJ. He told me that once he wins the Worlds, he wants to come and train with me because I trained Frank, so he wants to train with me. Well, he won the Worlds. He was the first non-Brazilian to win it. So then he came and started training with me. As a result of him, we got more people, and they went on from there and there. There's many fighters, but that's how basically it started.
Wow. I mean, BJ Penn was incredible. I think he is one of the very few people that got his black belt in jiu-jitsu in less than 5 years.
I believe so. Yes.
Which is very hard to do.
Very hard to do.
I think this is one of the important things about jiu-jitsu as well, is that you can get white belts that compared to a normal person in the street are so dangerous to a normal, for somebody who isn't doing jiu-jitsu and someone is, and they don't just throw out belts like it's candy, it takes a good amount of years to become a black belt in jiu-jitsu. And I think that's really important.
Yeah. Well, the one thing that people don't understand about jiu-jitsu, and even though I don't do jiu-jitsu, I understand. When you get into jiu-jitsu, you do contact right away. So it's just like sparring in boxing or kickboxing. You don't spar when you enter a kickboxing or a boxing arena. You don't. You practice, and you rarely get to spar. Okay, well, in jiu-jitsu, in judo and wrestling, what do you do right away?
What else is there to do? It's like somebody's going to be on top of you one way or another.
So it's just like actually a street fighter, right? If you got a person that's had 1 street fight versus a person that's had 400 street fights, if you put the guy that had 400 street fights versus the person that had less than 10, who more likely is going to win?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's common, right? So basically, that's why I equate jujitsu as being so incredibly dominant, because they go for it right away. And jujitsu is for self-defense, right? Wrestling's competitive, right? Judo is competitive. Jiu-jitsu is competitive, but it's been mostly for self-defense, you know, and that's why it's so effective. And, you know, when people come to me, they ask me, you know, what should I do? Should I do this? I say, well, if you can only take one art, you need to take jiu-jitsu. And they're looking at me, but you're a kickboxer. I go, yeah, I know enough
Yeah.
that I know what's the best art.
Through
and I'm telling you right
experience,
now,
yeah.
jiu-jitsu is what you want to do.